But I'm so excited to be here today with Blaine, and Blaine would love you to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Most definitely. Jen, it is such a pleasure to be here co-hosting with you this afternoon on this rainy day. As Jen mentioned, my name is Blaine Cowart. I am the Senior Director of Homeowner Services for Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity. And, you know, I find working for Habitat, I've been with Habitat now 9 years, most people know the brand name Habitat for Humanity, right? You know it's something about homes, something about affordable housing. What you may not know is that Dallas Habitat actually works with hundreds of families every year across the Metroplex to help them become ready for home ownership, not just to buy a Habitat home, but to buy any home. And a critical part of that program is our financial and home buyer education that we'll share a little bit about today with you all and talk about some of the initiatives that we've launched recently. So excited to be here today. Jen, I thought, if you don't mind, I thought I would kick us off by pitching a question to you to kick us off today. And the question is, why, in your opinion, is it important for innovation to intersect with good?
Oh man, I mean, I think it's everything. And sometimes I think about kind of the evolution of business and the evolution of how things have operated. And, 20 years ago, everyone started all of a sudden talking about corporate social responsibility and the triple bottom line. And how do we look at being environmentally and sustainably responsible alongside looking at profits? And this concept of social good to me has always been there, but I think it's being talked about more as part of that intersection point. And, I think obviously, more than ever, and COVID has shown and exacerbated the divides that reside in our communities, certainly, but all over the world. And so I think as we look to solve the pressing challenges, whether they're health or economic, we have to also, I think, take a step back and say, how can innovation create permanent, lasting change that's needed to happen for quite a while? And how can we use this particular experience right now as a catalyst to say, we don't want Band-Aids anymore. We need to come together and find a way that we can really get everything done. And the second thing that I'll just say is, as a society and as individuals, I think the expectations for how we're being served by cities or companies, has really evolved. And some of that is instant gratification, right? We expect a quick response in terms of service, but we're also expecting to be connected with what we need. And that to me also speaks with the good component. How do we go that step further? So how about you? How do you see that intersection?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I think that particularly when it comes to some of the social issues that certainly Dallas Habitat is working to eliminate, and same with the North Texas Innovation Alliance, social issues are hard. These are complex issues, right? And so sometimes it just requires, reimagining, rethinking some of the solutions that might have worked in the past, but maybe don't work today. And I think to your point earlier, Jen, COVID-19 has really shown a light on this for us to collectively think about as forces for good in our community, right? How we can collaborate and retool some of the solutions that we've tried in the past and think about how we breathe new life into really, lasting impact and magnified impact as well, being able to reach the masses.
100%. And I think you bring up a really important point in terms of coming together, because these issues are so meaty and so complex. And I think a lot of times we feel paralyzed by it, or I do too. I'll sit in these forums with these reports and just go, oh my God, I don't know where to start. And I think the whole point is it's not one institution's fault and it's not one institution's shoulder to burden to fix it. And so I think each of us, on this call, beyond this call, what is the highest and best use of what we do, what our company does, what I personally am passionate about, and how do you carve out that slice of, again, what is the highest value way I can contribute and not feel like I or DIA or Habitat have to take all of it on, because frankly, none of these are going to be able to be solved by one entity or one sector. So I just think these conversations are so important. And I've followed the work that Habitat has done for decades, and I'm so just impressed and love all of the stories and the impact and all the work that y'all do. And I think a lot of people may not be aware of how much y'all innovate. And to your point, the services that you provide outside of building and selling homes. And I know in the past, a lot of these services, a lot of this education has happened in person, but y'all made the decision to really shift to having these resources available on demand and online. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
I would love to, Jen. Yes, absolutely. All day I can talk about that part of our program.
I know.
You know, truly,
Yeah.
first and foremost, I would say, you know, us delivering our educational format in an online way. And by the way, this was pre-COVID, right? This is early 2019 when we really deployed this initiative that we'll talk about today, where we call this initiative PocketWise. It's our digital financial education platform. And the reason that we chose to bring our education into an online format was really twofold. I would say the first and most important aspect for us was eliminating the biggest barriers to access for the communities that we serve. So majority of the communities that we serve at Dallas Habitat are, single parents. 70% of the families that we serve are single parents, oftentimes working more than one job, oftentimes working non-traditional work schedules. And so as wonderful and relevant and applicable as the content was that we were teaching about in our financial education workshops, it's all for naught if people can't participate. And so, we thought to ourselves, well, are we holding ourselves back? Are we holding our clients back by reserving this valuable information if you can only make it in this one particular format? And I think that, in talking with a lot of nonprofits, you spoke earlier, Jen, you mentioned about, sometimes feeling paralyzed. And I think that, when it comes to technology and tech innovation and tech solutions in the nonprofit sphere, sometimes there is paralysis around that. I found, again, pre-COVID, right, so many others that I would speak to in the community that say, well, I just don't know if that's something that our populations or our communities would take advantage of. But here's what we knew at Habitat. Our clients are mobile first, specifically they're smartphone first. Right. And so we knew that if we were able to deliver these resources in a format that is literally at their fingertips, we're going to be able to see incredible participation that we never would be able to achieve in an in-person format. Right. And so that kind of parlays into that second aspect of why we chose to take this into an online format, which for us was about, scaling up and magnifying our impact in our community. So, in the Habitat sphere, we say quite a bit, we're not going to build our way out of the affordable housing crisis, right? Habitat, maybe at best we can build 50 homes a year, right? But the affordability crisis that the city of Dallas is facing is way huger than that number, right? So our question to ourselves is, how do we equip more families in our community to take the step of home ownership, whether it's with Habitat or in the traditional marketplace?
I love that. I love that. And it just again speaks to how do we elevate and empower other organizations that are doing complementary things. So we're never reinventing the wheel. We're never duplicating efforts, because nobody, especially in the nonprofit space, has enough resources to do the same thing over and over. And often we don't know what everybody else is doing. And so the key there is connecting the dots, I think.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. And the beauty of this platform particularly is that it's open to anybody, anywhere for free. And so this has been, the focus of our conversation heavily at Dallas Habitat since COVID began this year. A lot of individuals reached out to us and said, I know that this is something that you launched last year. Is this something that we can utilize with our programs? And when we talk about this collaboration, right, and not having to do it all ourselves, this is the beauty, is that, community stakeholders and investors have helped Habitat invest in this platform and in this resource. Why not share the wealth in our community? So,
love it.
So Jen, I would love to hear a little bit from your perspective about the work that North Texas Innovation Alliance is doing in our community and some of the innovative approaches that you all have deployed recently.
Oh man. So I think, we've learned so much since 2015 when we launched the Dallas Innovation Alliance, and some of the things we learned that we're really proud of is, number one is building the coalition, right? So we have everybody from the city of Dallas and Dallas County to DART to the Chamber to AT&T and Toyota and startups like Park Hub, because we want to it's not just about working with companies that are massive. We want them involved. We want their expertise, but we want to also elevate the local community. How do you continue to test? How do you raise the profile? How do you get closer to commercialization faster by having this real world test bed and living lab with which to deploy? And so through this kind of first phase, we tested 10 projects in what we call the Smart Cities Living Lab in the West End. And so there were lots of reasons to do that, but by testing 10 integrated projects, we were able to show not just how does smart irrigation help with operations and water use, but to say how does the data that we capture from all of these different solutions give us answers we would never have gotten in a silo. And so an example of that is we had pedestrian sensors put up and down Market Street and in a number of different areas. And then we measured that against when is there increased foot traffic, what times of day, what days of week. And it wasn't always what you would intuitively think. And we shared that information real time with local businesses in the West End. And so they were able to take that, maybe adjust marketing specials, appetizer specials, and get more of that foot traffic in the door. And they saw double-digit increases in revenue and customer count year over year for the duration of that pilot. So there's all kinds of things that we were really excited about, and it's the fastest to market smart cities initiative in the country. We went from developing the problems we wanted to solve to launching it in less than a year. And other cities say this would have taken us 3 or 4 years to get in the ground. And it's really a testament to the freestanding public-private partnership model that we put together, in partnership with the city and everybody else. So that was kind of our first learning. And then what we're working on right now is we're focused in South and Southern Dallas and projects related to transportation, public safety, and the digital divide. And similar to what you were talking about in embracing these or taking on these initiatives pre-COVID, for about the last 18 months, we've been working on this concept of the mobile learning lab and this great bus that we ripped everything out and converted into a mobile classroom and giant souped up hotspot. And the whole initial idea was it's not meant to be a permanent solution, right? Like we're not going to put hundreds of buses out there and say mission accomplished. But what we know is that these communities and these kids can't wait for, years long infrastructure deployment. And so how do we bridge that gap? Particularly the homework gap is what we were focused on. When kids come home and they can't do their homework, that gap just gets exacerbated. And so that's what we were working on pre-COVID. And obviously this accelerated, one, the spotlight on that need, but two, how do we need to modify the services we're providing, the days of service? We have tutors on board. We've got other, one-on-one resources to help guide these kids in these communities. And so we're just so excited about that. And alongside that, these larger initiatives to try and solve the big problem, right? The overall problem, like Operation Connectivity and Internet for All, which is school districts across the Metroplex, alongside the city, alongside other institutions. And how do we fix this once and for all through leveraging resources and programs that maybe each entity is investing in separately, but how do we say, okay, well, let's bring all of it together? And that's just been given me so much hope and so much optimism, because we're watching these partnerships solidify, become formalized, and be, rolled out into the world, that we can hopefully do this, because internet is a basic utility. We hear that more and more, and access to health, access to fresh food, access to education. All of it is dependent at this point. So those are some of the things we're most excited about.
That's fabulous. And Jen, I have to tell you, I've been following the project that you all are doing with the bus for a long time now. And I think, this is incredibly important work when we think about really lifting up and empowering communities that, are at a significant economic disadvantage in Dallas. The same communities that Habitat works in, works to uplift and empower as well, right? I was participating, in a United Way roundtable last week on the subject of the digital divide. And in that conversation, we were discussing top 10 zip codes in Dallas that, have unequal access to internet. Like you said, Jen, this is a basic utility at this point, particularly with COVID, but even pre-COVID, right? And what do we do to form collaborations, to, form alliances in our communities that pour into and lift up these communities, particularly in the southern sector of Dallas. And all of the communities that we prioritize and serve at Habitat are in the top 5 out of the top 10 of these neighborhoods. And so I think, this is a time that's really, ripe for how we figure out how we plug in together. As you mentioned, earlier on in the conversation, Habitat may not be inherently in the business, right, of, spearheading connectivity in neighborhoods in and of ourselves, but geez, we sure do have access to huge constituencies of homeowners that are those affected most by this issue of the digital divide, right? And so I think that just heightens the importance of this kind of collaboration. Habitat homeowners and communities often look back to Habitat for understanding how they can be advocates and learn how to be advocates for their community and learn how to tap into resources. So the more that we can make that connection and connect the dots for our communities, the better.
Oh my gosh, 100%. And I'll tell you, when we talk about how it impacts everything in terms of internet access, it's not just, internet is not always, if you build it, everything is fixed, right? So internet connection doesn't matter if it is available if you can't afford it. And if you can afford it and have your home and you don't know how to use it effectively or safely, identity theft and fraud is something that's a big part of the curriculum we're going to put into place, especially with seniors. But I think in terms of, if we look at the training component and we look at the modules that y'all have created and looking at it as a whole, as a holistic approach on how do we prepare everybody. I could have used some of that home ownership education before I bought. I learned, we all learn things, but so I think if we look at it again, if we look at the holistic approach, because all these issues are interrelated, all of these skills are interrelated. I'm just really excited for us to work together, more as the year goes on and as we find new ways to serve.
Absolutely, and us as well.
Very good. Very good. I'm sorry, guys. I'm looking around because I'm watching the clock. I'm making sure we don't go too far off track. But I think, something that we, had wanted to talk about is what advice would we give to organizations that are on the call? And I would love, I almost want to put in here, what types of, who's on the call. So my assumption would be that we've got corporate and startup and nonprofit and all, kind of the whole mix. But I don't know if you want to kick off. What advice would you give to organizations that are looking to implement innovation or create a culture of innovation? What have you guys learned in making the shift you have?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing that I will say, has benefited our team at Dallas Habitat in terms of innovating is staying curious. That's part of the fun part about innovation is thinking about constantly, right? This is not necessarily something that's structured so much as it's baked in to the culture, right? Baked in to think about in everything that you do, is this the best way? Is it still the best way? Years ago, is it still today, right? And particularly when it comes to, again, some of these social issues that agencies like Habitat are really working to combat in our community, complex issues like, homelessness, poverty, income inequality, these issues change and evolve over time, and our programs and our strategies should too. And so thinking about, how we create a culture that fosters curiosity, right? And where all of our employees, all of our team members feel empowered to think about how things can be done better, more efficiently, or in new ways. And I think there's really great power in that, particularly, again, in kind of the nonprofit sphere, and thinking about how we innovate for good, right? Thinking also about empathy for our end user, right? Our customers, the communities that we serve, the individuals that we serve, and thinking about, how in tune, how in sync are we with their needs so that we can make sure that our programs, our services, the way that we do the work that we do remains up to date and relevant for the issues that they may be facing now. And again, just very poignant, right, with COVID-19, with the situation kind of rapidly unfolding right now, there's a lot of uncertainty that's facing, particularly the communities and families that we serve at Habitat, and thinking about what worked last year, does it still work today? What can we do, differently? Beyond kind of thinking about our own kind of corporate or nonprofit or agency culture, too, I would say to anybody who's here on the call today and thinking about, I personally may be a change maker and I may not work for a nonprofit, but I may want to find out how I get involved, right? I saw a comment come through earlier from Karen, who works at Mr. Cooper, hey, Karen, huge supporter of Habitat. Thank you so much for joining us today, right? And so somebody like Karen might say, well, I don't work for somebody like Habitat, but I'm very interested in getting involved and seeing how I can contribute to helping agencies who are out here innovate for good. And I would say, start by getting involved. Start by, getting close and upfront and personal with these issues. And there are a variety of ways to do that. That can be through skills-based volunteerism. It can be through, maybe pro bono services that you can support agencies with. And then, right now, I would say to all of, anyone tuned in today of the younger generation, right? Like, us millennials and then the Gen Z, coming up behind us now, think about YP groups. These are a phenomenal way to get involved and understand, what's going on in your community, the issues, the social issues that could use innovative solutions. And then thinking about, how you might be able to get involved. Dallas Habitat has a young professional group. We call it Habitat Young Professional, HYP. And that's a great example, right? Of if you're here today and you're thinking, this issue, affordable housing, financial education, homebuyer education is something I'm very passionate about, but I'm not quite sure how to plug in. These are opportunities that are out there. Think about how you can plug yourself in and learn more, because I think, all of us have something that could be a true value add to innovating.
Oh my gosh, all of this, I co-sign everything you just said. And I think I need to give a shout out to Mayor Star Council, which is a young professional leadership program that's really about creating civic engagement and education and just embedding with like-minded folks that are all across every background you can imagine. And it totally changed the trajectory of my life. I was in it the year before Trey and I co-founded the DIA, and it just really, one, increased my passion and understanding about how and where do I plug in to try and make impact, and gave me the courage, honestly, to say, this is what I'm passionate about over here, and did a complete industry shift. So that's my plug. Trey will be happy about that. I don't know who else is on the line that's from MSC, but so I think, yes, educating yourself and really digging into what you think you're passionate about. I'd also say a couple things. One is, there was a point in time that I was completely overwhelmed. I felt like there were so many things that I wanted to work on and that I felt like maybe were going awry. And the advice I was given was pick one, so that, again, you're not overwhelmed, and say, okay, where do you want to focus your energy? And so would encourage folks that, like me, have scope creep to really try and hone in on where you want to dig in, because that's the really surefire way. And I know for us, two things have been really helpful that maybe are not necessarily the first things folks would think about. One is engaging with kids, because kids have better ideas than we do a lot of the time, and they certainly have different ideas that would never occur to us. So I think in your organizations, no matter what space you're in, I think in general, like, if you can pull in a focus group of kiddos, or if you can get kids involved in some way, like, the idea generation that comes from that and how do they see the world is just magical and super fun, and mixes things up too. And then other volunteers or people that have approached us to get involved, I think it is so beneficial when the sector that these volunteers are in has nothing to do with what we do, because the perspective that is brought from that is so valuable, and brings a perspective and a skill set that allows us to evolve and get outside the box, because part of innovation is you have to think differently, and how can we approach things differently from that perspective. And then I think risk aversion from leadership potentially in organizations can be a hindrance to innovation. And so it's really important, obviously, to find a champion within your organization if you're really looking to shift in an industry that perhaps has been around a long time, perhaps has not kind of reached that inflection point to need to really turn the ship, if you will. And so really find that one champion as there's generational change within organizations and in leadership, and just seize that opportunity. I know when Trey and I were starting DIA and we were meeting with Mayor Rollins and we were trying to figure out how we do this, one of the, I think, key points was saying, you know, we know y'all have to be risk averse. That's the nature of everything. As a startup type organization, we can take on that risk. So if this works, all you. If it doesn't, we're prepared to fall on swords. And he was like, when do we start? Let's do it. You know, so how do you provide some avenues to really lessen that aversion? Or that's a big piece of the culture shift, I think. And certainly necessity is the mother of invention and being willing to do things differently. And I think, again, we've all seen this in the last 6 months. And the hope is that that continued evolution of how things are done and how quickly and collaboratively is not something that kind of gets, the faucet doesn't get turned off as everybody goes back to business as usual, which everybody is going to be slammed, and we understand, you know, it is what it is, you know, intuitively. But if we can keep that engagement and that momentum, I think real innovation occurs at a broader level.
I could not agree with you more, Jen. I know I'm over here doing this because I agree 100% with everything you said. But, you know, particularly, I think, you know, what you mentioned about having an innovation champion is something I very much resonate with, right? Because I think a lot of it, again, you know, boils down to there oftentimes is kind of, you know, paralysis about what if, be it because of, you know, risk mitigation. Perhaps, you know, it could be, sorry, I think we're getting a little bit of feedback, maybe. Perfect. But, you know, and also just could be, you know, the fact that, you know, it's scary. It is scary to do something totally remarkably different than has ever been done before. And there's going to be a lot of doubters, right? So a lot of times you do need somebody who's willing to, you know, be out on the forefront of that issue and lead the way and say, it's okay. You know, you can follow me and let me show you, get some early wins done and let me show you that it can be done. And I also just love what you mentioned about children though, right? Because I think that relates to what we were talking about earlier about, you know, just staying curious. Kids are so curious. They are not fearful on the whole, right? And so much more willing to just dive in and try something new out. I love that. And particularly for those of us that have, you know, these wonderful, you know, sort of brigades of volunteers who are willing to volunteer with our agencies and advance our mission, thinking about how we create meaningful opportunities to involve children in the work that we do. And then be willing to open our own ears, right, and listen to what they have to say as well.
Love. So I'm looking at the clock, and I think we're supposed to shift over to questions right now, which I love. So I am scrolling through the chat here, and guys, make sure you put stuff in the chat if you have a question for us. Let's see. Sorry, y'all. Thank you for all the comments. Let's see. Access. And shout out if you find one before me. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Jamila, I see you and your comments. First of all, thank you for connecting the dots on that. We love Wings. Wings is an amazing organization. Jamila dropped a note in the chat earlier saying, you know, there's a lot of crossover between the work that we're talking about that Dallas Habitat does and the work that Wings does. And particularly because Wings' focus is on women empowerment. And again, you know, kind of de facto, Dallas Habitat, majority of the individuals that we serve are women or women-headed households. So I think that there's a lot of benefit there. They have some fantastic financial coaching that they do. And we have partnered with them in the past. But I think, you know, again, always a ripe opportunity to kind of, rethink partnerships, rethink alliances, and ensure we're really leveraging all the resources that are out there in our community. So love that, Jamila. Thank you.
I want to connect in with the bus too, because we love all of this. So how do we continue to put together workshops and programming? And I know to that point, when we were talking about the concept of the bus early on, people were like, oh my gosh, so you're going to create all of this STEM experiential programming? And I said, absolutely not. My God, I said, there are experts all over Dallas that's what they do. So we want to tap into y'all on the line and beyond and say, okay, you guys are the experts. Will you come in and partner with us to provide this to these communities and to continue to expand that? So I want all the ideas. So everybody in the chat, reach out, please, please, please. Let's see. Please. There we go. I knew I had some MSCers on here. I'm so sorry, y'all.
Jen, I see a question come in from someone near and dear to the Habitat mission, Dave Crawford.
Hey.
I know. And so let me pitch this one to you.
Very good.
You can ask him a question anytime he wants. But so let me pitch this question to you. I'd love to hear your feedback on this before I dive in. Dave wants to know, how do you mitigate risk at the expense of innovation? It's a great question.
Yeah, so I think there's different ways to do it. And this is one where sometimes it will depend on the sector, I think, that are working together and you're trying to fix, because some are obviously much more highly regulated, as an example, right? And so, but I think mitigating risks, a lot of that comes through partnerships. The more that are at the table, the more that's shared. And sometimes that's financial risk when everybody is contributing from that perspective. I think always, if there's a North Star, I get corny about it, but if there is a core piece of mission that everyone is working toward, there is typically more of a willingness to take a measured risk. And so I think it's about starting with kind of the quick win and spreading your wings a little bit and saying, okay, so this worked, now what? But you can find innovative ways also within the space of a very highly risk averse deal. And sometimes that's process improvement. So we haven't even talked about, some innovation isn't sexy, but it's critical, right? So if you think about infrastructure, you think about internal processes. What are different ways that your staff communicates? What are different ways that y'all do work orders if you're in that type of an industry? And so I think sometimes even trying things differently from a back end perspective can help increase the willingness to do things that are more forward facing. But from a financial risk standpoint, that's really where the P3 type of model comes in. And I think Ben Mackey from DISD wrote a great op-ed last week, I think, that talks about investment in technology and this digital inclusion piece, and talked about, okay, if we put $40 million in our bond that's dedicated toward creating this infrastructure, if every major entity in Dallas or DFW or whomever also said, okay, well, we'll allocate this chunk of money, and then all of a sudden you have if you have, let's say 40 million times, let's say 6 entities, right? You have almost $250 million. You can do a lot of permanent infrastructure and make a lot of change in that concerted way, as an example. And then everybody is bought in and whatnot. So that's kind of the one layer down, and could talk about that forever. But Blaine, did you have some thoughts too on that?
No, I was going to say, when you mentioned collaboration, Jen, to me, that is an incredibly important part of this. I think, the more that we can have our constituents within our community really buy in to this in a meaningful way, invest in some of the solutions that we're looking to bring forward, I think that lends a credibility to any kind of innovative new initiative that an agency is trying to spearhead. And again, I think more and more in today's fundraising landscape, we see an appetite for funders when it comes to collaboration. Funders don't want to see agencies trying to solve these complex problems alone, right? Because they know as well as we know, it's going to take a village really to make monumental shifts in some of the impact that's being done in our community. So it behooves us, right? But also it pleases, funders in our community to make sure that we're working smartly about innovation and bringing together all of the stakeholders that can really help us solve the overarching issue.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, I think to the stakeholder engagement and buy-in perspective, I think it's a really good point too. We talk about we talk about finding a champion internally, and I think it's really important to know, to reference that we need both treetops and grassroots. A lot of times people talk about you need the CEO to totally buy in and go, but if the employees aren't equally engaged, the execution of that innovation isn't going to happen, or is going to happen from a griping standpoint. And if you're looking at stuff like DIA does, right? If we didn't do community engagement sessions, if we didn't make sure that we really understood what needed to happen, how we made that happen, were people excited about it, did they want to get engaged, as well as that buy-in, so it's equally important to focus on top down and bottom up, for lack of a better term.
Completely agree. And that's that value, right? Of making sure that that's baked into your culture, that it's not siloed out, but that it's just a part of what your company or your agency encourages employees to think about in their everyday work. Because your employees on the front lines, they have direct access to your constituents, to those that you serve. And so why not encourage them to say, if this isn't working as it needs to be, feel free to bring these ideas. And to not be afraid to pitch something that might seem wild and crazy.
100%. And I would say something that I was told by a mentor really early in my career, right after I entered the workforce, that was super helpful to me. And now I can understand when I work with interns and different things, is one, if you are going to go to a leadership with either a problem or an idea, think 3 layers down before you come in, because it's much more likely, obviously, that, and it sounds simple, but not always intuitive, especially for me coming right out of school. So if I come in with a problem, I better have thought of 3 different ways that I think maybe it could be solved. Or if I come in with an idea, here are 5 people I think that we could talk to see if this would be viable or not. And so I'll just throw that out there. I don't know if we've got some young pups on the line, but that was extremely helpful to me. And it's something I appreciate now where we're at. So, okay.
Great advice.
Okay. All right. As a nonprofit, what has COVID impacted the way you fundraise, assuming it has? Do you want to kick that off? I know you mentioned the collaboration and the Better Together piece, and we can jump in.
Absolutely. I would say from our perspective at Dallas Habitat, this could not be, a more relevant question for us. And, truthfully, I think a lot of nonprofits right now, including Dallas Habitat, are having to reimagine what these experiences look like and what fundraising opportunities exist, right? But I think the beauty is that if you are an agency, I will speak, on behalf of Dallas Habitat, who, is really, trying to be forward thinking about new opportunities, new initiatives that you're constantly doing. It adds layers of value, right? So that even when, what seems to be a central part of your mission, that opportunity may not exist in our COVID-19 world, right? But there are so many others that do behind the scenes. And so in 2020, in the age of COVID, we are so thankful that we had the forethought years ago to think about how we expand our impact through digital education, through online financial education, through counseling that we've now been able to take into a virtual format. Because, it's very possible that we will not have the number of volunteers that will be out swinging a hammer or doing these things that are so tangible and how people self-identify with our mission in 2020. But nonetheless, it's incumbent upon us to innovate our fundraising models and ensure that we can have those conversations. We're brave enough to have those conversations with funders about your only experience, working with Habitat may have been swinging a hammer for the last 10 years. Let's talk about what it looks like in 2020. Here are the opportunities we have. Will you be brave enough to join us and trust us that through collaboration, these are robust and thriving initiatives, and we want you to be a part of that.
Love it. Love it. Love it. And I think, candidly, everybody has been impacted. There's not an industry, there's not a human, right, that has not been impacted by COVID. And I think for nonprofits, we had several funders have to decommit, because of budget constraints. And I think that it's caused a lot of the collaboration between nonprofits. So, we actively, like almost operationally, are doing a lot more with different nonprofits because we're all, looking at those models from an efficiency standpoint. And I think that we similarly it was happenstance that our focus was digital inclusion. And so the amount of work that we're able to do and the amount of willingness to prioritize that has been really encouraging and has allowed us to really expand our mission and involvement in that. So there's always a push-pull kind of within what someone referred to as the supply chain of fundraising, right? If individuals don't have time, if there's not resources within funders, if funds are being shifted toward the most critical needs. I mean, COVID is having a much more dramatic effect than a hurricane, for example, right? That have had to be adjustments from here on out. So I think we're having to pivot as a sector as much as others. So that's kind of all I have to add, I guess, on that. So let me see. So 2 minutes left. Blaine, what are ways that this group can get involved and support you at Habitat?
I love that. So, particularly, again, don't underestimate the power of advocacy and volunteerism. And I think that those two things go hand in hand. At Dallas Habitat, we are really passionate about, trying to ensure that every constituent that we interact with and engage with is truly an advocate for our mission and can help us in the way that they are best suited to do that. So I would say, if you're interested in learning more about engaging with any part of our mission at Habitat, whether it's, home construction, whether it's financial education, whether it's our digital financial education initiative that we're doing, reach out. You're welcome to reach out to me directly. We can get you pointed in the right direction. But I want you to know, particularly in a time like this, on the brink of, economic recession, we know that, volunteerism and community support is more critical than ever. And so if you have the heart and the passion, we want to work with you. Reach out and let us know. Jen, what about you?
I love that. Again, I think really specifically and tactically for us right now is we want organizations that bring programming or want to engage with both children and adults. We want to provide kind of these wraparound trainings and access to resources that internet is a bedrock of. And so whether you have a location like a YMCA or somewhere that would like to house the bus and have programming there, whether you're someone that does experiential learning or provides other opportunities, like we want to continue to build out and have the most robust ecosystem of services that we can provide for the communities that we're in and expand. And so that's really the immediate, need. And I always love having smarter people than me to be able to give their time and treasure. So if you are really data trained, beyond my meager GIS background, so skilled volunteers, if you're passionate about this intersection between tech, data, innovation, improving quality of life and solving problems, reach out. I'll find something valuable for y'all to do. So I think that'll do it. And we're a minute over. And so Blaine, this was so much fun and so grateful for everybody joining, and hopefully we'll all meet again soon and hopefully in person soon.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone who joined today. Jen, thank you for this conversation. Always a pleasure.
Okay, bye guys.
Take care.
Bye.